Today, we're going to be talking about how you can be happier according to science. So, to start off with, this lecture is based on this review of psychology titled How Can People Become Happier? A systematic review of pre registered experiments. So, first of all, why should we even care about being happy? Well, most of humanity actually cares about being happy. The majority of people want a happy life versus something such as meaningful or a psychologically rich life. And this was one of the studies that was cited. So, when we talk about being happy, what does that really mean? Well, we're going to use subjective well being. That's a term that they've created to sort of quantify happiness. And so when we are happier, we know that we have an increase in our health. Our health tends to get better. Those are correlated, and I've done a previous video exploring that. There's also the broaden and build theory, which states that when you are happy and you experience positive emotions, you're able to be more creative and think of new opportunities, sort of propelling you in an upward spiral. So now let's go and talk about the article we're going to be talking about. So in order to create this review article, they screened 5,953 studies. And what they found was only 251 studies were pertinent, and they're only using pre-registered experiments, which I'm going to explain what that is in a little bit. And in total, they came up with 48 papers and a total of 65 studies within these papers. And so when we talk about a pre-registered experiment, what it is it's basically the researchers declaring what they're going to study before they publish it. And no matter the outcome of their experiment, they're going to end up publishing this in a journal. And so this does a couple things that's really useful, is it reduces the publication bias we see, especially in psychology. A lot of people are not publishing research articles unless they find something new or exciting, and that's just how academia works, and this is a big bias in science overall. Additionally, there's this concept of p-hacking, which is altering the data consciously or unconsciously to come up with a significant result, something that can actually be published in journals. And one of the issue is when you have a bunch of science that is has this publication bias at play. So only the most exciting or the experiments that actually get results are published. And then you also have p-hacking, which is sort of manipulating the data to get a specific result, normally something that is significant or does show an effect. When you do a meta-analysis of those studies, you're actually compounding the error that's created. And then you can really get to some misleading results. So that's why it's really important to use pre-registered studies, and that's sort of almost the gold standard for psychological literature. And so whatever result they get, it has to be published, and the data has to be open so that others can look at how they analyze the data, and this reduces a lot of bias. And so now we get into the nitty-gritty. How can you actually be happier? And so this review article looked at a bunch of studies on different ways that people can be happier. And all these are pre-registered studies, as I said. And so the first is gratitude. And so why would we even think that gratitude can make us happier? Well, gratitude is generally a positive emotion. When you are actually being grateful, you sort of inherently have a positive emotion. And so what is thought is that when you think in a grateful way and when you feel that gratitude, it actually shifts your perspective to being happier. And so how does this actually play out when we look at the science? So here we have two studies. And at the top here, you can see how do these studies, when people are experimented to be grateful versus not, how does that affect their positive affect, which is positive emotions, their negative affect, their negative emotions, and life satisfaction, and how does that affect their happiness? So what we're looking at here is the Cohen's d, which is basically a measurement. If you see in the bottom left here, it's a measurement showing how far apart the averages of two distributions are. And so this this Cohen d sort of allows us to examine how much an effect this is. And here on the bottom right, you can see that a small effect size is normally from 0.2 to, from 0, a Cohen of d of 0 to 0.2, and then a medium effect would be from 0.5 to 0.8. A large effect would really be going from 0.8 and up. That's a very large effect. And so what we see here is that being grateful in the short term, these two studies only looked at short-term outcomes. And what we see is that you have a pretty moderate to small effect on positive affect, and you see a little bit of reduction in negative affect, but 0.07 is not a lot to be very significant in the term of the effect size. And life satisfaction you see at 0.34. That's a smaller effect size, and same with happiness. So overall, there is some evidence to show that being grateful can increase your happiness. And now let's look at social interactions. So what they did in these experiments is they just had people, spend time talking with friends or spend time doing something else. So that's how they sort of can experiment on how does interacting with others affect your positive affect, negative affect, and so on. And so what they saw is that after spending time actually interacting with people, there's a pretty large to moderate effect on your happiness. Specifically in positive affect, you can see a 0.5 Cohen d and a 0.48, which is a medium effect size. But then in this one study, they saw that there was a 1.08 Cohen d effect size, which is pretty large, showing that spending time with others can really increase your happiness. And so now we go to acting happy, in quotes. So I don't know if any of you had seen, but there were some TED Talks and some videos showing, if you smile, you'll be happier. If you pose as if you're happy, you'll actually be happier. Well, unfortunately, some of these studies, other research teams had been unable to replicate those findings, which sort of calls into doubt, is this really what's going on? And so that's called the facial feedback hypothesis, which is if you smile, even if you force a smile, you're going to be happier. Well, that was called into question because others weren't able to replicate that. And so when we think about acting happy, how would you even test that? There's a couple things we have to think about. First of all is something called demand characteristics, which is, me as a researcher, I have this idea that people are going to be acting happy is going to make them feel happier. And so then the subject kind of attaches to that idea, and that can kind of cause a bias. Also, there's a belief bias, which is not as much of a bias, but just something to be aware of, which is how we think what our expectation is of something, drastically affects the outcome. So if I think that by acting happy or having a natural smile, I'm going to feel happier, that can actually cause me to feel happier, if that makes sense. And so here we actually have a lot of experiments that were ran, and lots of these were just having people sort of not fake a smile, but come up with a natural smile. And that was sort of their experimental condition, was natural smiling. And so from here we can see, I would say this is looks to be like a medium effect size of, acting happy or having it natural instances where you're smiling, that does seem to increase your happiness overall. And so now we're moving to another idea to increase happiness, which is injecting novelty into your everyday life. And so there's idea of hedonic adaptation, which means that as we go through life, if you've ever thought about, let's say you're a student athlete, and you've been spending so much time trying to get a certain race, a score on a race, not a score, but a certain time on your, 50-meter dash, and you finally get that time, right? You're so happy at the beginning, but that happiness starts to wear off pretty quickly, and this is called the hedonic adaptation, where we sort of adapt to our environment and our life circumstance, and we always sort of recalibrate our happiness to a sort of baseline. And so it's not like we're all still super happy about that test that we got 100% on in middle school. That sort of fades over time, and that's called hedonic adaptation. And so when we look at injecting novelty into our daily lives, and some of the ways that they did this was having people make binocular eyes to watch videos, or pretending like their weekend was a vacation and spending their weekend as if it was a vacation, we see a relatively small to medium effect size. We see an increase in positive affect and a decrease in negative affect. And then we also see an increase in general satisfaction and enjoyment. So practically, we've looked at 4 examples of how we can be happier with gratitude, social interactions, acting happy, and novelty. And so practically, I think everyone sort of intuitively knows that being grateful is just a pleasurable experience in itself, and that can actually lead to some benefits. And so we should try to take time to be grateful. Try to look at life and circumstance in a positive way, in a grateful way. What I always like to think about is I like to think about the past a lot and how people before me had it so much rougher. Honestly, they didn't have cures for things like polio, and they didn't have vaccines. And so imagine if you lived in a world where you could die from just a small cut, and that was just common. So I'm really grateful that we're living in this time. We can also think about social interactions, spending some more time to hang out with people, but then you can even go further and just carve out more times to hang out with your friends and family. That's going to be very beneficial to you. And then acting happy, finding things that spark joy or positivity in your life and doing those things. So maybe getting some hobbies and really investing time into hobbies you enjoy, and then injecting novelty in your life. This can be changing your routine, eating at new places, making friends, exploring new passions, anything you can really think of to just spice up your life. And so as we conclude this, I really want to talk about the hedonic adaptation and this idea that we sort of have a set level of happiness that is partially genetically based, and then our upbringing, and also our life circumstances at the time. So here you have a graph here of your sort of baseline of happiness, and then some good stuff happens, some bad stuff happens, so you're always sort of bouncing through the two. And I think there's a lot of forces that are right now pulling us down into having less happiness than we could. Something that comes to mind is FOMO, for instance, the fear of missing out, and use of social media, and how that can sort of make us feel unhappy a lot of times. So we really have to spend a lot of time and a lot of effort to do the sorts of things that are going to make us happier. You have to actually put, conscious effort into doing some of the things that make us happier. And with that, I would like to end today's discussion, and I would like to thank you for listening, and I'd like to thank you for commenting, and please share your opinions with me. I'd love to read them in the comments. Thank you.